They said she had shamed the whole town the moment she stood beside him at the altar. In a place where dust storms rolled across the plains like judgment from the heavens, and church bells carried gossip faster than the wind, a woman's choice was never just her own. The town of Red Hollow had long memories and narrow hearts. They remembered every mistake, every whisper, every broken rule, and to them, her greatest crime was simple. She had married an Apache warrior. The morning after the wedding, the wooden sidewalks were louder than usual. Boots struck the planks hard, voices rose without shame, and windows opened just enough for eyes to peer through lace curtains. She walked alone at first, chin lifted, her dark blue dress brushing the dust. Name was Serafina Vale, and there was steel in her spine that no amount of mockery could bend. Traitor to your own kind, someone muttered as she passed. Married a savage, another spat. Serafina did not slow her steps. She had grown up in this frontier town. She knew the scent of horses and leather, the taste of well water drawn before sunrise, the sound of hymn songs echoing through the white-painted church. She also knew cruelty when it wore a polite smile. They did not see what she had seen. They had not stood on the ridge at sunset and watched him face down 3 armed raiders alone. They had not seen the way he spoke to elders with quiet respect, or how children ran toward him instead of away. They had not heard his laughter, deep and rare, like thunder rolling across open land. His name was Thunderhawk. Even the name unsettled them. He was Apache, yes. A warrior raised under endless skies, shaped by harsh deserts and sacred mountains. His presence carried the weight of history, of battles fought long before Red Hollow had been carved into the earth. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied with a strip of leather. His eyes were steady and unreadable, like a man who measured his words carefully and wasted none. To the townsfolk, he was nothing more than a symbol of fear, a reminder of stories passed down in anger and ignorance. To Serafina, he was the man who had once carried her injured father 20 miles through rocky terrain to save his life. He was the man who had refused payment. The man who had said only, "Life is not a debt, but gratitude fades quickly in places ruled by pride." When Serafina chose him, truly chose him, the town council called it madness. Reverend Coldwell warned of consequences. The saloon owner, Ironwood Briggs, laughed loudly enough for all to hear. Even women who had once braided Seraphine's hair turned their backs in the market. The humiliation did not end at whispers. On Sunday, when Serafina entered the church alone, heads turned in unison. No one shifted to make room on the pew. The hymn began, but it felt hollow. She stood through the entire service, spine straight, hands clasped, refusing to bow under their stares. Outside, Thunderhawk waited beside his horse. He did not step inside, not because he feared them, but because he respected her world enough to let her walk it without shadow. When she approached, his gaze softened in a way no one else ever saw. "You do not have to return," he told her quietly. "And let them think they were right," she replied. A faint smile touched his lips. In that moment, the whole world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing between dust and sky. Their marriage was not born of rebellion. It was not a reckless romance fueled by defiance. It had grown slowly, like wild sage pushing through stone. Shared silences, shared danger, shared understanding in a land that tested every soul. Yet Red Hollow did not care for truth. It cared for appearances. Rumors spread like wildfire across dry grass. They said Thunderhawk had bewitched her. They claimed he sought to claim land through marriage. Some insisted he was hiding something darker, something violent. What they did not know was that Thunderhawk had been moving quietly behind the scenes for months. While the town slept, he had ridden beyond the valley, meeting with tribal leaders and federal envoys alike. While men at the saloon boasted of courage over whiskey, he had been preventing bloodshed none of them even knew was near. Red Hollow stood on the edge of something dangerous. Railroad men had begun surveying land near Apache territory. Gold had been whispered about in nearby hills. Greed had a way of turning neighbors into enemies. Thunderhawk understood this better than anyone. He had seen what happened when treaties were broken and promises burned. Serafina knew only pieces of it.
Oh, yes.
He never burdened her with the full weight of looming conflict. But she sensed it in the way he sometimes stared at the horizon too long, in the way his jaw tightened when riders approached from the east. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Ironwood Briggs gathered a crowd outside the saloon. He had always thrived on spectacle. That night, his voice rang louder than ever. "Ask her who she really married," he shouted. "Ask her what he's done beyond those hills." The crowd murmured eagerly. Serafina stood on the boardwalk, heart pounding but face calm. Thunderhawk stepped beside her, silent as a storm building in distant mountains. "What are you accusing him of?" she asked steadily. Briggs grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "You think he's just some wandering brave? You think he's nothing more than a love-struck warrior?" He paused for effect. "Tell them who you are," Briggs demanded, pointing at Thunderhawk. The air felt thick, heavy with expectation. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thunderhawk's gaze swept over the crowd. There was no fear there, only calculation, only patience. For years, he had allowed them to see only what they wanted to see. A quiet Apache man, keeping to the edges of their town. A husband devoted to his wife. Skilled horseman. It's nothing more. But beneath that calm exterior lived a name spoken in military camps with caution. A name known among tribal nations with respect and loyalty. A name tied to negotiations that had prevented entire territories from erupting into war. Serafina felt the shift in him before anyone else did. The straightening of his shoulders, the subtle tightening of his grip on the reins. "Enough," she whispered, not in fear, but in concern for what might follow. Because once truth stepped into daylight, it could never return to shadow. Briggs laughed again. "Or are you afraid they'll find out your husband isn't just an Apache?" A rider appeared at the far end of the street, dust trailing behind his horse. He wore a federal marshal's badge that caught the last light of day. The entire town fell silent as he approached and dismounted. His eyes locked onto Thunderhawk. And then, in a voice loud enough for every soul in Red Hollow to hear, he removed his hat and bowed his head slightly. "General Thunderhawk," he said, "we've been looking for you." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd like lightning splitting open the sky. Seraphine's breath caught. Briggs' grin vanished, and Thunderhawk finally stepped forward into the full weight of who he truly was. But the marshal's next words carried something far heavier than respect. "There's trouble coming," he said. "Thing they know you're here." "There's trouble coming," the marshal repeated, his voice carrying across the silent street. "And they know you're here." The words did not need explanation. Fear already lived in the bones of frontier towns. It slept lightly and woke easily. Serafina felt every pair of eyes shift again, but this time not with mockery. This time there was uncertainty. Question none of them wanted to ask out loud. "General," the title hung in the air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Thunderhawk did not flinch. He studied the marshal carefully. The man was tall, broad across the shoulders, his badge polished but his boots worn from hard miles. His name was Marshal Gideon Cross, and he was not a man known for bowing lightly. "You rode fast," Thunderhawk said evenly.
"Not fast enough,"
Gideon replied. Ironwood Briggs cleared his throat loudly, trying to pull back the attention that had slipped from his grasp. "General of what? There ain't no army here." Gideon turned slowly toward him, his gaze sharp. "You might want to mind your tone." The tension on the street thickened. Mothers pulled children closer. Ranchers adjusted their hats. The word general did not belong in Red Hollow. It belonged to battlefields, 2 flags raised and lowered, 2 decisions that changed borders. Serafina stepped closer to her husband. She did not ask him if the title was true. She already knew it was. There had always been something larger about him, something that stretched beyond this small town and its narrow view. "You should come inside," she said quietly to Gideon. "Not everything needs to be said in the street." Thunderhawk nodded once. Without another word, he guided Gideon toward the small house at the edge of town where he and Serafina had begun building their life together. It was modest, with whitewashed walls and a wide porch that faced the open plains, a home built not for show but for peace. Behind them, whispers erupted like sparks in dry grass. Inside, the air felt cooler. Serafina poured water into tin cups, while the 2 men stood across from each other, silence heavy between them. Gideon removed his hat and placed it on the table. "Should have told her," he said bluntly. Thunderhawk's gaze flickered towards Serafina, then back to Gideon. "She knows what matters." Serafina set the cup down harder than she intended. "I know you're respected. I know you've been riding beyond the valley. I know men listen when you speak. But I did not know you carried the title of general. Thunderhawk's voice softened when he answered her. Titles bring targets. Gideon leaned forward. Targets are already coming. The room felt smaller. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters as if echoing the warning. Who? Serafina asked. Gideon hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Rail syndicates hired private guns. They want the land west of here. They've been stirring unrest among smaller tribes, spreading lies. They're hoping for chaos. If conflict breaks out, they'll step in claiming to restore order. Then they'll lay track wherever they please. Seraphine's stomach tightened. Red Hollow had heard rumors of railroad expansion, of gold surveys of investors from back east. But those had felt distant, like stories meant to entertain around a fire. This town sits between worlds, Gideon continued. Apache territory on one side, federal interests on the other. If someone lights a match, it will burn through both. Thunderhawk's expression did not change. But Serafina saw the storm gathering behind his eyes. They want me blamed, Thunderhawk said calmly. Gideon nodded. They can paint you as the aggressor. They justify bringing in troops. They capture you. They remove the one man capable of uniting both sides. The weight of that truth settled over the room. Serafina moved closer to Thunderhawk, her fingers brushing his hand. Is that why you kept riding at night? He met her gaze fully now. There was no hiding in his eyes. I have been meeting with Chief Blackstone and with Colonel Valor Hayes, trying to prevent this. Two powerful names. Two men from opposing sides who rarely agreed on anything. You trust this colonel? She asked. I trust his desire to avoid war, Thunderhawk replied. That is enough for now. Gideon crossed his arms. Valor Hayes respects you, but not everyone under his command does. And there are men who profit from conflict. Serafina thought of Ironwood Briggs, of the hungry look in his eyes whenever gold was mentioned, of how quickly he had tried to humiliate her. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Does the town know? She asked. Gideon shook his head. They only know pieces, and pieces are dangerous. Thunderhawk finally sat down, the wooden chair creaking beneath his weight. If the town fears me, they are easier to divide. Serafina knelt in front of him, refusing to let the space between them grow. Then we show them who you are. A faint smile touched his face, but it carried sadness. Truth is not always welcomed. She placed her hand over his heart, then let them see it anyway. The intimacy of the moment did not go unnoticed by Gideon, who cleared his throat gently and turned toward the window. Outside, a few townsmen lingered across the street, pretending not to watch. You both need to understand, Gideon said. There are riders already moving this way, not soldiers in uniform. Hired men, they won't knock on doors. They'll create an incident. Serafina rose slowly. They expect Thunderhawk to respond. Yes, Gideon answered. They expect the general to step forward, and when he does, they'll strike. Silence fell again. Thunderhawk stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town that had mocked his wife. The same town he had quietly protected from raiders and drought negotiations. The same town that now unknowingly stood on a knife's edge. I will not allow blood in these streets, he said firmly. And if they force it? Gideon asked. Thunderhawk did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward Serafina. In his gaze was something raw and deeply human, not a general, not a warrior, just a husband who had promised love under an open sky. I chose this town because you love it, he told her softly. I stayed because of you. Emotion rose in her throat, but she held steady. Then we face whatever comes together. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, though the sky remained clear. Strange omen in a land that respected signs. Gideon placed his hat back on his head. I'll speak with Colonel Valor Hayes tonight, but you need to prepare. For what? Serafina asked. For the moment when the town realizes the man they mocked is the only thing standing between them and disaster. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened slightly, not from pride, but from responsibility. As Gideon stepped onto the porch and mounted his horse, Serafina noticed movement at the far end of the street. 3 unfamiliar riders, dark coats, slow pace. Watching, she felt Thunderhawk come up behind her, his presence steady and warm. They've arrived, she whispered. Yes, he said quietly. But whether they had come to test him, to provoke him, or to capture him, neither of them yet knew. And somewhere beyond the ridge, forces were already shifting, preparing to turn Red Hollow into the center of a storm that would test love, loyalty, and the true meaning of power. The three riders did not enter Red Hollow with haste. They moved slowly, as if the town already belonged to them. Their coats were dark, their hats pulled low, their horses strong and well-fed, men who traveled prepared, men who did not fear being recognized. Serafina felt the air change. It was not only tension, it was calculation. Thunderhawk stepped down from the porch and walked toward the center of the street. Not aggressive, not submissive, just present, the way a mountain stands before a storm. The rider stopped several yards away. The one in the middle removed his gloves finger by finger, deliberate and controlled. His face was sharp, clean-shaven, with eyes that did not blink often. His name would soon be known as Victor Rourke. "We were told we'd find you here," Rourke said, his voice smooth as polished steel. Thunderhawk did not answer immediately. Around them, townspeople pretended to continue their business, though every ear strained to hear. "You found me," Thunderhawk replied. Rourke smiled faintly. "General Thunderhawk. That is what they call you now. They call me many things." Rourke's gaze flickered briefly toward Serafina on the porch. "And some of them do not sound so flattering." Seraphine's fingers tightened around the porch railing. She felt anger rise, but she would not give him the satisfaction of reaction. Ironwood Briggs stepped out of the saloon, drawn by the promise of spectacle. "What's this about?" he demanded loudly. Rourke did not even glance at him. "Private business." Gideon Cross had not yet left town. He paused his horse near the general store, watching carefully. The badge on his chest gleamed in the late afternoon light. Thunderhawk sensed the fragile balance. One wrong word could ignite suspicion. One wrong move could give these men what they wanted. "You ride into town without introduction," Thunderhawk said calmly. "State your purpose." Rourke slid off his horse with effortless grace. "Opportunity." A murmur passed through the crowd. "We represent investors," Rourke continued. "Men of vision. The railroad will come through this territory. It is progress, wealth, stability." Serafina noticed the way he avoided saying whose land the tracks would cross. "And you believe I stand in your way," Thunderhawk said. Rourke's smile widened. "We believe you influence both sides. Apache leaders trust you. Federal officers respect you. That makes you powerful. And power unsettles men like you," Gideon called out from across the street. Rourke finally turned his gaze toward the marshal. "On the contrary, Marshal Cross, we admire power. We simply prefer it aligned with our interests." The subtext hung heavy. "Join us or be removed." Serafina stepped down from the porch and crossed the street, ignoring the whispers. She stood beside her husband openly, her presence both defiant and intimate. "This town does not belong to investors," she said clearly. "It belongs to the people who built it." Rourke studied her with open curiosity. "You must be the bride, the one they'd speak of." "I am Serafina Vale," she answered, her voice steady. "Brave," Rourke said softly, "or reckless." Thunderhawk shifted slightly, not threatening, but protective. The subtle movement did not go unnoticed. Rourke glanced at the gathering crowd. "Let us speak plainly. Conflict is coming whether you wish it or not. Smaller Apache bands are already angry. Ranchers are fearful. A single spark could turn neighbors into enemies. And you intend to provide that spark," Gideon said. Rourke ignored him again. "General Thunderhawk, if you publicly support the railroad, tensions ease. You become a bridge to prosperity. And if I refuse?" Thunderhawk asked. Rourke's eyes hardened for the first time. "And others will take action. Actions you may not control." The threat was wrapped in politeness, but it was unmistakable. Serafina felt her heart pound. She looked at the townspeople, at Ironwood Briggs, who suddenly seemed far less confident, at Reverend Coldwell standing stiffly near the church steps. None of them had imagined the humiliation they had hurled at her would lead to this. Thunderhawk folded his arms slowly. "You assume I can command loyalty like a hired gun. You command more than loyalty," Rourke replied. "You command trust. That is rarer." Silence stretched. Behind Rourke, one of his men shifted impatiently. The second rider scanned rooftops, measuring exits and angles. They were not here only to negotiate. Gideon finally dismounted and walked closer, boots striking the dirt with authority. "This town is under federal jurisdiction. Any aggressive action will be met accordingly. Rourke gave him a thin smile. Of course, Marshal, we are businessmen. The words sounded hollow. From the edge of town, another rider appeared. This one wore a military coat bearing the insignia of Colonel Valor Hayes. He rode fast, urgency in every movement. Seraphine's breath caught. The web was tightening. Valor Hayes dismounted without ceremony and approached Thunderhawk directly. "We need to speak," he said quietly. Rourke watched with keen interest. "Ah, the Colonel himself. Seems our timing is excellent." Valor did not acknowledge him.
Ouch!
His attention remained fixed on Thunderhawk. There was a raid last night on a supply caravan near Apache territory. Survivors claim they saw men wearing tribal markings. Thunderhawk's eyes darkened. "My people did not authorize such action." "I believe you," Valor replied. "But settlers do not. Fear is spreading." Serafina understood instantly. A manufactured chaos, exactly as Gideon had warned. Rourke clasped his hands behind his back. "You see the problem? Emotions run high. Without strong leadership, misunderstandings escalate." Thunderhawk stepped closer to Valor, lowering his voice though the crowd still strained to hear. "The markings were false." "Yes," Valor answered quietly. "But proving that will take time, and time is what they are stealing," Thunderhawk said. Serafina felt caught between two worlds. The town that had raised her, the man she loved, both standing at the edge of manipulation. Ironwood Briggs suddenly spoke up, his tone uneasy. "If Apache bands are raiding caravans, maybe we need more protection." Rourke seized the moment. Protection requires funding, infrastructure, partnership with those who can provide resources. The hook was baited with fear. Thunderhawk turned slowly, addressing the entire street. "You all know me," he said firmly. "You have seen my actions. Ask yourselves, who benefits from turning neighbor against neighbor?" His voice carried power, but also weariness. Reverend Coldwell shifted uncomfortably. "Are you denying the raids?" "I am denying the lie behind them," Thunderhawk answered. Rourke tilted his head slightly. Bold words. But words will not calm frightened ranchers. Serafina stepped forward again, her voice rising above the tension. "Then let truth calm them." She faced the crowd directly. "You mocked me for marrying him. You called him outsider, savage. Now men from far away come offering you protection from a danger they helped create." Her words struck deeper than she expected. Faces lowered. Doubt flickered. Rourke's expression cooled. "Careful, Mrs. Thunderhawk. Accusations without proof are dangerous." "Then provide proof of your innocence," she replied. For the first time, irritation flashed across his features. Valor Hayes stepped between the groups slightly. "Until this is investigated, no outside force will take control of this town." Rourke gave a short nod. "Very well, you will wait." But his eyes promised movement behind the scenes. As dusk began to settle, the riders mounted again. "Think carefully," General Rourke called out before turning his horse. "When fear grows, people look for someone to blame. It would be unfortunate if that someone were you." They rode out as slowly as they had entered. The town remained frozen long after they disappeared beyond the ridge. Valor looked at Thunderhawk gravely. "If another incident happens, I may not be able to hold back federal response. And if I act too openly—" "They call it rebellion," Thunderhawk replied. Serafina slipped her hand into his. She could feel the strain in him now, the burden of every decision pressing down. Gideon exhaled sharply. "They're setting the board. Every move calculated." Thunderhawk looked out toward the darkening horizon where the riders had vanished. "Then we must see further than they do." But even as he spoke, distant smoke began to rise beyond the western hills. And no one yet knew whether it signaled another lie or the beginning of something far harder to contain. The smoke rising beyond the western hills did not fade with the wind, thickened. By nightfall, Red Hollow stood restless. Lamps burned later than usual. Doors that were often left open were now bolted. Horses were kept saddled. Fear had moved in quietly and taken a seat at every table. Thunderhawk watched the horizon from the porch, Serafina beside him. The air smelled faintly of ash. "That is not a grass fire," he said. Serafina knew it too. Grass fires ran wild and fast. This smoke rose steady, controlled. Behind them, Gideon cross-paced the yard. "Valor sent scouts," he reported. "If it's another staged raid, They're escalating. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. They want a reaction before sunrise. Inside the house, a map lay spread across the table. Marked trade routes, Apache territory lines, survey points recently staked by railroad agents. Each location now felt like a spark waiting for flame. Serafina stepped closer to Thunderhawk, resting her hand against his back. She could feel the tension coiled beneath his calm exterior. "You've carried this alone for too long," she said quietly. "I did not want you caught in it," he answered. She gave a soft breath of disbelief. "I married you. I chose your world as much as you chose mine." He turned then, his gaze softer than it had been all day. The lantern light reflected in his eyes, and for a moment the war outside their door faded. He cupped her face gently, grounding himself in her presence. "They will try to break the town by breaking us," he said. "Then we do not break," she replied. Their foreheads touched briefly, an intimate pause in a world spinning toward conflict. From the far end of town, a bell began to ring. Not the church bell. The iron signal bell near the stables. Gideon was already moving before the second strike sounded. "That's the Western Watch." Thunderhawk mounted his horse in one fluid motion. Serafina caught his arm before he rode. "Promise me you won't let them force your hand," she said. His voice was steady. "I promise I will act with honor." It was not the promise she wanted, but it was the only one he could give. They rode toward the edge of town where a small group had gathered. Rancher Stonewall Kane stood with soot on his sleeves, fury in his eyes. "They burned my outer fields," Kane said, "left markings carved into the fence posts." Thunderhawk dismounted and walked toward the damaged wood. The symbol carved there was crude but deliberate, an Apache war mark. "It is wrong," Thunderhawk said immediately. "The angle, the stroke. It is imitation." Stonewall Kane looked torn between anger and confusion. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to believe what you see," Thunderhawk replied. "My people do not attack without reason, and they do not hide behind false signs." Gideon knelt near hoofprints in the dirt. "3 riders," he muttered. "Heavy horses, not tribal stock." From behind the gathered men, Ironwood Briggs stepped forward again. His voice carried suspicion, sharpened by fear. "Every time trouble happens, it leads back to Apache land. And every time someone profits from that trouble, it leads back to investors," Serafina said firmly as she approached. Briggs faltered slightly, but recovered. "You defend him because you're blinded." "No," she said calmly. "I defend truth." The tension between townsfolk and Thunderhawk felt like a rope pulled tight enough to snap. Then another rider arrived, breathless. Valor Hayes. "There's more valor," said grimly. A wagon convoy was stopped near Dry Creek. No casualties, but supplies were taken. Witnesses swear the leader gave orders in perfect English. A silence followed that revelation. Thunderhawk met Valor's gaze. Both men understood. The deception was becoming careless, almost desperate. "They want escalation," Thunderhawk said. "They want federal troops marching into Apache land by morning." Valor nodded. "If Washington hears that settlers are under threat, I may not be able to stop it." Serafina felt the ground shifting beneath everything she had known. Her childhood town, her marriage, her future. All hanging between manipulation and truth. From the shadows near the stable, a young Apache scout stepped forward. His name was Red Talon. His expression was urgent. "General," Red Talon said in a low voice. "Chief Blackstone sent word. Riders approached our outer camp wearing settler coats. They fired shots into the air and fled." Stonewall Kane swore under his breath. The pattern was undeniable now. Thunderhawk turned to face the crowd fully. "You see what is happening?" he said, his voice carrying across the dark field. "They attack both sides. They leave signs to breed hatred." Briggs shifted uneasily. "Or you're just clever enough to make it look that way." Gideon rose sharply. "Enough." But doubt had already planted itself in the soil of Red Hollow. Serafina stepped into the center of the circle, unafraid of the stares. If Thunderhawk wanted conflict, he would not be standing here explaining himself. He would already be gone. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. "You humiliated me for marrying him. You mocked his name. Still he stayed. Still he protected you." Faces lowered. Even Stonewall Kane looked conflicted. Thunderhawk placed a steady hand on her shoulder. The gesture was simple, intimate, powerful. Before anyone could speak further, distant gunfire echoed faintly from the hills. One shot, then another. Not aimed at the town. A signal. Valor's expression hardened. They're drawing lines. Thunderhawk mounted again. If they strike Apache land tonight, war begins. And if you ride there, townsfolk will say you let it, Gideon warned. The trap was closing from both sides. Serafina grabbed Thunderhawk's reins. There must be another way. He looked down at her, torn for the first time, not uncertain of strategy, but of cost. If I do nothing, they divide us, he said softly. If I act openly, they accuse. She searched his face in the lantern glow, then act where they cannot see. Understanding flickered in his eyes. Valor stepped closer. What are you thinking? Thunderhawk glanced toward the northern ridge. Rourke believes he controls the board. He underestimates loyalty. Red Talon straightened immediately. Chief Blackstone waits for your word. Gideon narrowed his eyes. If you move against Rourke without proof, he will cry persecution. Thunderhawk nodded. Then we gather proof. The plan forming in his mind was dangerous. It required trust from both sides and secrecy within a town already trembling. Serafina squeezed his hand one last time before releasing it. Come back to me. I will, he said. But as he rode into the darkness with Red Talon and 2 trusted riders, the uncertainty in the air grew thicker than smoke. Valor Hayes turned to Gideon. If this fails, we'll have open conflict by sunrise. Gideon watched the disappearing silhouettes. If it succeeds, this town will finally understand who they mocked. Behind them, Ironwood Briggs slipped quietly into the shadows, his expression unreadable. Far beyond the ridge, under the cover of night, lanterns flickered in a hidden camp where Victor Rourke studied a map and waited for news. And somewhere between those two forces, Thunderhawk rode toward the heart of the conspiracy. Knowing that one wrong step could ignite the very war he had spent years trying to prevent, night swallowed the plains as Thunderhawk and his riders moved along the northern ridge. The moon was thin, offering little light, but Thunderhawk did not need much. He knew this land the way a man knows his own heartbeat. Below, hidden between 2 low hills, lanterns flickered. Rourke's camp! Thunderhawk raised his hand and the others stopped. Red Talon dismounted silently and crept forward, returning moments later with a whisper. They are preparing another false raid. Settler coats, tribal markings ready. Thunderhawk's eyes hardened. How many? 6 men, Rourke among them. The trap was clear now. By dawn, another staged attack would spark retaliation. Federal troops would march. Apache warriors would respond. The railroad syndicate would step in as saviors of order. Profit built on chaos. Thunderhawk turned to his riders. No bloodshed unless forced. We expose them. He moved first. They descended quietly, circling the camp from different angles. Thunderhawk stepped into the lantern light without warning. Rourke looked up, startled but quickly composed. General, I was expecting you. I know, Thunderhawk replied. Around them, Rourke's men reached subtly for their weapons but froze when they realized they were surrounded by Apache scouts emerging from the shadows. This is unfortunate, Rourke said smoothly. You misunderstand our intentions. Thunderhawk walked closer, his presence steady and commanding. You burned fields. You carved false signs. You attacked both sides. Rourke shrugged lightly. Progress requires pressure. Progress does not require lies, Thunderhawk answered. Before Rourke could reply, another voice came from the darkness. That will be enough. Colonel Valor Hayes stepped into view, flanked by Federal soldiers. Marshal Gideon Cross stood beside him, rifle lowered but ready. Rourke's calm expression faltered for the first time. Colonel Hayes, I did not realize this was a social gathering. Valor's voice was firm. We followed the smoke, the tracks. Gideon held up a leather satchel recovered from the camp. Inside were branding irons shaped like Apache markings, settler coats, forged letters meant to implicate Thunderhawk. You left quite a trail, Gideon said. Rourke glanced around, calculating. Cannot prove intent. Thunderhawk stepped forward and pulled back the canvas of a nearby wagon. Stamped with Rourke's seal, Valor's jaw tightened. That will be enough. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through dry grass. Rourke straightened, his charm slipping away. You think this stops the railroad? It only delays it? It stops you, Thunderhawk replied. Federal soldiers moved in, securing Rourke and his men without chaos. There was tension, but no reckless violence. The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with truth uncovered under lantern light. As Rourke was escorted away, he looked back at Thunderhawk. "They will never fully accept you." Thunderhawk met his gaze calmly. "Acceptance is earned through action, not fear." By sunrise, Red Hollow had gathered in the town square. News traveled fast in frontier towns. Valor Hayes stood before the crowd, holding the forged documents high for all to see. "These men orchestrated the raids," he declared. "They sought to divide settlers and Apache to seize land for profit." Murmurs rippled through the townsfolk. Stonewall Kane removed his hat slowly. Reverend Coldwell bowed his head in shame. Even Ironwood Briggs avoided eye contact. Gideon Cross stepped forward. General Thunderhawk rode into danger to stop bloodshed on both sides. All eyes turned. Thunderhawk stood beside Serafina, not elevated above anyone, not demanding recognition, just present. Then Serafina felt the weight of every stare, but this time it was different. Not mockery, reflection. Stonewall Kane approached first. He extended his hand, rough and steady. "I misjudged you." Thunderhawk clasped it firmly. "Fear makes enemies where none exist." Reverend Coldwell followed. "This town owes you an apology." Thunderhawk glanced briefly at Serafina before answering. "If you must apologize, apologize to her." Silence fell again. Serafina stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. "You humiliated me for loving a man you did not understand. But love is not weakness. It is courage." No one interrupted. "We all nearly became pawns in someone else's greed," she continued. "Let this be the lesson." Ironwood Briggs finally spoke, his voice subdued. "We let suspicion blind us." Thunderhawk addressed the crowd directly. "Red Hollow stands between worlds. It can choose fear, or it can choose partnership." From the edge of town, Chief Blackstone rode in with several Apache elders. The sight alone would once have caused panic. Now the town watched quietly. Chief Blackstone dismounted and nodded toward Valor Hayes. "We seek peace." Valor returned the nod. "Then we build it together." The symbolic weight of that moment settled deeply. Settlers and Apache standing in the same square, not as adversaries, but as neighbors. Over the following weeks, cooperation replaced suspicion. Joint patrols were formed to protect trade routes. Land agreements were reviewed openly instead of behind closed doors. The railroad negotiations continued, but with transparency and consent from tribal leaders. Thunderhawk no longer hid his title, used it carefully, as a bridge rather than a weapon. General not of conquest, but of unity. And Serafina walked beside him openly. The same streets that once echoed with whispers now carried respectful greetings. Children ran past their porch laughing. Stonewall Kane brought fresh produce as thanks. Even Reverend Coldwell invited Thunderhawk to speak about peace during Sunday service. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the plains, Thunderhawk and Serafina stood on their porch once more. "It feels different," she said softly. "It is," he answered. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you regret staying?" He turned toward her, his expression gentle. "Never." In the distance, Chief Blackstone and Valor Hayes spoke near the well, discussing irrigation plans. Gideon Cross laughed with ranchers. Red Talon helped repair a fence alongside settlers who once feared him. Red Hollow had changed, not perfectly, not instantly, but meaningfully. Serafina looked up at Thunderhawk. "They found out who you were." He smiled faintly. "They found out who we are." Love had not erased conflict. Courage had not eliminated prejudice overnight. But honesty had dismantled a conspiracy designed to divide, and unity had defeated manipulation. The humiliation she once endured became a reminder of how far they had come. Thunderhawk took her hand, lifting it to his lips with quiet devotion. The frontier wind moved gently around them, no longer carrying the scent of smoke, but the promise of growth. Red Hollow remained a small town on the vast American frontier. Yet it now stood as proof that fear can be confronted, truth can prevail, and love can bridge even the widest divide. And in the golden light of evening, the Apache general and the woman who chose him stood not as symbols of scandal, but as partners in a future built on respect, resilience, and unshakable devotion.